No, I want to watch this one first. Not the ad. I definitely will check that out, though. Check out the eggnog video. It is funny. The eggnog video? The GameCube can now play PS1 games, and it's actually impressive. Ren was talking about this earlier in the stream, and I have to see what in the world level of quality the GameCube can play PS1 games at. Because surely, like... Surely it's not going to be competent, right?
Yep. Just like the old days. Last year, there were some pretty big breakthroughs for PS1 emulation on the Wii. An emulator called Wii SX had a surprise update released on April 29th, 2023. But before this, the last update posted was...
Raise video volume. I can do that. Is that maxed out? There? How's that?
From 2016, 13 years prior. This update dramatically improved performance for PS1 emulation on Nintendo system with a new dynamic recompiler.
Can I just say, I absolutely adore, like, the homebrew scene. I love the fact that there... Oh, you're still here, Ren. I love the fact that there are people just doing stupid shit like this. Like, it's just cool.
They're called Light Wreck. And while that's great and all for the Wii, this update also applied to their other PlayStation 1 emulator called Cube SX that's designed for the GameCube. So today... Like,
the fact that somebody... Like, I get it for a console like the Xbox 360 or the PS3, but, like, the fact that someone's going out of their way to make this happen on the GameCube. Also, Amazon Basics mic stand. Every fucking YouTuber has this mic stand.
I'm going to show you the incredible progress that's been made by the homebrew community, bringing playable PS1 games to Nintendo's 6th generation console. I know PS1 emulation has pretty much been conquered online to the point that games are getting all sorts of enhancements.
How do you guys feel about, like, upscaling 3D models? Because obviously this ruins the original look of the game. But I don't know. I'm definitely of two minds about it. Because I did, like, I do it when I play, like, DS games. But I don't know. Upscaling is fine as long as it's optional. That's fair. But I mean, like, how do you do it yourself?
Applied with new textures, higher frame rates, and 4K. However, something like a GameCube running these games is more about the idea of it just being possible. For the PS2 to get PS1 games working when it released, Sony had to do a lot with the hardware alongside of the software. For example, the original PlayStation CPU is actually present on most PS2 motherboards and will handle
yeah, the PS2 is literally just a PS1.
I/O functions for PlayStation 2 games and will kick into PS1 CPU mode when called for backwards compatibility. Basically, even Sony wasn't accomplishing this with full software early on, at least not until late slim PS2 systems, from what I understand. When you compare...
They were doing it... Okay, I didn't know they did it in software with the late PS2. Because I thought... I didn't realize that anyone had even bothered doing software-based emulation for consoles, like, from the official supplier until... like, PS4? No, PS3. The PS3, there was the classic store, wasn't there? So that had some emulation in it. But early PS3s, I think, also had... Didn't early PS3s actually have backwards compatibility as well? I feel like they did. And did the 360 have backwards compatibility? I don't recall. I know the Xbox One can play 360 games. But I think that was emulation, not backwards compatibility.
Compare the system specs at the time, the GameCube fit nicely in the middle, at least on paper. Stronger than the PS2, but weaker than the Xbox.
I thought the GameCube was the fastest console in the generation. That's what I'd constantly been told. But I could be wrong there.
The original Xbox console is supported heavily in the homebrew community with PS1 emulation.
Yeah, that's because the original Xbox... This is the thing with all of the Xbox. Xboxes are literally just... So we talk about like modern game consoles just being like x86 machines. This is running a Pentium 3. The original Xbox was a Windows PC. It was just a Windows PC with a weird GPU and very, very specific hardware. And that's the way that Microsoft's always done it. They just fork Windows and just make a PC.
Weaker than the Xbox. The original Xbox console is supported heavily in the homebrew community, with PS1 emulation already working really well for years now. This is mainly due to the fact that Microsoft used off-the-shelf parts and turned in a very capable machine, especially with its CPU and RAM. It really...
I'm sorry, you can put an SSD... Wait, you can ribbon cable an SSD. Is that even going to be that much faster with the cable?
Was an impressive machine at the time, and I think is well worth picking up today to see everything the community has been able to squeeze out of this now 23-year-old system. I've done a few videos on modifying and trying out Homebrew on the Xbox, and if you're curious to see more, I'll link it down below in the description. The
hey,
GameCube,
underground,
unfortunately, has seen a rockier road to PS1 emulation, with a handful of emulators available running games at frame rates in the teens, if you're lucky.
Can't you hard mod the console to use SATA or something else without cable? I don't know much about Xbox emulation, but I know it's always been an x86 machine.
Basically, it's been an unplayable
or Xbox
mess,
modding, sorry.
and with the Wii just being a better-equipped GameCube, at this point, it's no wonder that they're really...
Doesn't the Wii have GameCube hardware, or is it software emulation? I actually don't know. How does the Wii play GameCube games? I don't know if it's just... Oh, it literally is just the same architecture, and it just runs slower. It just underclocks itself. Fair enough. Don't change what works.
There hasn't been much interest in development for the past several years. But now with this newly updated Cube SX released, I was looking to load up some PS1 ISO files and see what this little purple box could really do. Except there was just one problem. In order to load games last year, you needed to use the SD to memory card adapter, which I really don't keep around much after the advent of the SD to SP2. It's a little adapter that turns one of the bottom serial ports into an SD slot compatible with micro SD cards. This combined with Swiss is the ultimate combo, and it's used by, I would say, the majority of people with the modded GameCube at this point.
That's cool.
Unfortunately, Cube SX didn't support this adapter, but they mentioned it would be added later, so I put the whole thing on the back burner until now because with an update, they have indeed added support. It looks like along the way, they've managed to improve performance even further and smoothed out other things like disk swapping. So I downloaded the latest Cube SX dole file, PS1 BIOS, some ISOs, moved it all over to the SD card, and fired up Swiss. Once loaded into Cube SX, you'll see a pretty simple menu to explore with load ISO, current ISO, settings, credits, quit, and resume game. Poking around in the settings, there really isn't too much to adjust here. You want to keep the CPU core on Dynarec, and if you have a PS1 BIOS on your SD card, you can load it here. Pressing Execute BIOS will actually throw you into the PS1 menu, which is a weird thing to see live loading on that GameCube. For video, I have my settings here.
I have actually never had a PS1. I don't even know if I don't know if I knew anyone with a PS1, actually. Because when the PS2 came out, like, people just didn't care about the PS1 anymore. Like, there was functionally no reason to have a PS1, because the PS2 did everything a PS1 did. It had PS1 hardware, it played CDs. Yeah, there's no reason to have a PS1 unless you really, really cared about having the PS1 load screen.
Work the best for me. I have show FPS toggled to on, so you can get an idea how these games are running throughout this video. There are also options for mapping your controller out, and this becomes a bit of an issue since the stock GameCube controller doesn't have enough buttons to cover everything on the PS2 controller. Seems like a good time for someone to come up with GameCube to PS2 controller adapters and start mass marketing to the dozens of us out there who would actually use them here. Okay, on to the game, starting with one that was actually one of the harder titles to run, and that's Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Classic game, of course, but I figured the speed and fluid motion this game has,
it's
would
running
be a good
relatively
indication
well
for input and movement overall, and right away I was able to notice some stuttering happening, especially with the audio.
it's stuttering. Yeah, you're running at 46 FPS. Oh yeah, that's the other fun thing. So you know how it's like it was the console meme for so long that the human eye can't see above 30 FPS. These were children who literally never had a PS2. it like PS2 games ran and PS1 games often ran at 60 FPS. GameCube games often ran at 60 as well. 50 or 60 depending on the region. Oh, the audio is not great. Oh, that's a bit... Okay, it's rougher with the audio.
Pro Skater 2 ran at 30 FPS on the PS1 and Nintendo 64 originally. It's certainly playable, but can be a bit annoying with some of the random stutters when trying to balance on rails or pull off specials in the air.
The human eye doesn't work in FPS, but there comes a point where you will not be able to perceive a difference. Yes. I don't know what... I'm sure someone's done research. At what point does FPS become imperceptible? Yes, that's not right. That's not what I'm talking about. Not at what point does it look like motion? I've never used a 240 hertz display, but I can tell the difference between 120 and 165. $50 is such a weird number. It's based on, it was based on the power frequency of those regions. That's why. Also, it's going to depend on how old you are, right? But I don't know at what point you can't tell, like, it doesn't feel any smoother. I would imagine 240 is probably going to be like 95% of the way there. Because there are like 500 hertz displays on the market now. I don't know if most people are even going to tell the difference. Like, obviously, you can tell the difference between 60 and 500. But if you went from 360 to 500, is there a perceptible difference? I don't know. Hey, it's a game that I need to play at some point. Yes, I've never played FF7. Goblin these nuts. Man, I need to play FF7 at some point.
I pretty much had to. Square left Nintendo for Sony during the previous generation to develop Final Fantasy VII, and the rest is history with Sony going on to take over the home console market. I had to give Nintendo...
Rush weird. You can't tell the difference between 50 and 60, but you can tell big jumps like 60 to 100. Right, but if we went from 500 to 1,000, would you be able to tell that difference? Or is 500 so many frames that you wouldn't be able to feel the difference even at that point? Because there will be a point where you will not be able to tell a difference, where it's so much like it's the same thing with like resolution, right? Like you can tell a difference between like 1080p and 4K, but it's really hard. If you go from 4K to 8K, especially with like a 24 inch monitor, you will not be able to see shit. I'm back. How goes the game? We've swapped over to doing reacts now, but it was fun. I enjoy it. It's very good. I'll definitely hang a lot more of it.
Nintendo the alternate timeline here, where they went with discs for the N64.
This is someone running a PS1 emulator on a GameCube.
This would be a backwards compatible game for the GameCube. It runs well here too, at least, touching 60 FPS pretty consistently, outside of battles, with drops mostly coming from rendering the more detailed characters during fights. Even the spells like lightning look normal here, no signs of weird graphical glitches that you can run into with emulation on lower end hardware. It even formatted my memory card for me and saved the game, so that's a plus.
Wow, actually impressive.
A bit more of the heavy 3D type game for the PS1, and it holds up pretty well. It does fluctuate quite a bit here, jumping around in the high 40s to high 50s depending on how many cars are on the screen at once. The original ran at 30 FPS like many PS1 games, so if that 60 FPS lock is too much, I'd prefer just to stick as close as possible to the original experience here. I did notice a bit of input delay, especially around sharp corners. Not sure if that was due to some of the frame timing that was jumping around, or just input delay that needs to be worked out. Otherwise, no crashes. Well, okay, other than the ones that I caused, of course. Mega Man Legends ran well, but I did have an issue where I wasn't able to lock onto enemies since you need to use R2, and that wasn't available by default. I'd be able to go in and set this in the controls menu, but this just brings up the issues around the lack of buttons on that GameCube controller, even compared to the original PS1 controller. There was a similar situation with Metal Gear Solid, which also ran well.
I didn't realize there was every 3D Mega Man game.
By the way, but I couldn't pick up the codec call when approaching the elevator because there's no select button. For Twin Snakes, it was mapped to a combination of 2 buttons, so maybe that would be a good way to get around this in some cases. The last update for Cube SX was posted just over a year ago in November 2023, and at this point the emulator is in a really good spot, with many of these games running well above 30 FPS through purely software emulation. There are still refinements for each title, sure, since it isn't perfect, but I am really impressed by what a community of talented developers were able to pull off on a system that really has no business running these games this well. With that said, would I recommend
never played a Mega Man game.
The GameCube as a primary way to emulate PS1 games? Absolutely not. There are a bunch of devices you can buy for way cheaper than the GameCube to emulate PS1 games, or even by using a device you already own like the PC or phone you're watching this video on right now. Get the GameCube with Swiss and the SD2,
Prehistoric Marvel
to play
Rivals.
GameCube games. But if you already have one or are curious to see how different PS1 games you like to play run on your GameCube, try it out and see for yourself. I'll leave a link to the GitHub page that has the emulator below in the description. Make sure you follow the instructions they've laid out, especially with the file path structure on the SD card, and you'll be up and running in just a few minutes. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think about the PS1 games running like this on the GameCube, and I'll see you next time.
That is just cool. Like, yeah, it's not the most productive way to play PS1 game, but like,